Okay, fantastic. So let's get started. We are going to be looking at 4 different areas during the webinar today. The first 2 will offer just a brief look at the need for EAL in ITT programming. And we will also give you a brief overview of the ITT modules that we have from the Bell Foundation. The main purpose of the webinar, however, today is the launch of the 3rd module, which Emily will be presenting in a little bit later, along with some suggestions for how it can be used within your context and setting. Okay, so we'll start right now with the need for EAL in ITT. Okay, some of you, if you have been to some of our other launch webinars before, you may have heard this. I do want to just go give a brief overview of some of the reasons why we have felt a real need to provide some materials for ITT programming. And we will be looking at 4 different areas today. One is that we will be looking at the increasing linguistic diversity in our schools out there. We will also look at some research findings, increased level of provision needs that we're seeing in schools, along with, we will take a look at the ITT core content framework today as well. But before we get started with any of this, I'd like you to just take a quick 2 polls on some facts and figures here. Again, these will pop up on your screen, but the first one asks, what percentage of pupils in England are recorded as having a first language known or believed to be other than English? So A, B, C, or D, if you can reply to that poll. And the second one will be, how many times is EAL mentioned in the ITT core content framework? Again, A, B, or C. So go ahead and respond to those 2 polls, and we will, those anonymous polls, and then we will tally that up in just a couple minutes. Okay, I think we've had enough time at this point. It looks like quite a few of you have responded at this point. We have about, looks like quite a few of you have responded to the first answer correctly. We've got about 68% of you said that yes, about 20% of all of the learners in schools are learners who use EAL. That's taken from the school census of 2022. And in response to the second answer to this, it looks like we were split. 45% thought it was A, which is 0, and 42% thought it was 16. And then a few thought it was a bit more. But yes, the answer, unfortunately, is 0. EAL is not mentioned once in the ITT core content framework, which is a little bit, raises some alarms, right? Because we do have such a high percentage of our learners who do use EAL as an additional language. Okay, so given that, we're going to continue to look at some further details specifically about for teachers right now, but nearly half of all teachers will be teaching pupils from diverse backgrounds. We know that to be the case. And let me see, I just have to get this out of here. Oh, here we go. And then also 27% of teachers work in classrooms where at least 10% of the pupils use a first language that is different from the language of instruction, which will be in English. Okay, we also know that behind these figures, migration is really no longer a reason for continuing increases in the numbers of learners that we see using EAL. Most of these learners are born in the UK, many of them with British citizenship. And we are just seeing that schools are increasingly multilingual spaces. And in a good positive note, we have greater diversity amongst teaching staff at this point as well. I think it was in 2018, the figures were 15% of teachers were from diverse backgrounds, which is a real good, helpful sign as well. Okay. So basically what this means is that we are working in a very super diverse environment where ethno-linguistic diversity and EAL can now be fairly regarded as ordinary and permanent features of schooling in our education system, okay? And because of that, again, a major need for EAL and ITE programming, ensuring that student teachers are adequately prepared to work with increasingly complex school populations and to meet the needs of EAL pupils from diverse backgrounds as part of their initial teacher education program. It's essential so that we are preparing teachers for the reality of the schools that they will be going into, okay? A second reason that we're looking at today is what some research findings have shown us. A study that came out of the Edinburgh University that was funded by the Bell Foundation in 2018, looked at student teachers and at teacher educators and found that many student teachers and educators across the teacher prep routes, meaning both routes with school-based and with university-based, felt that they lacked confidence and experiences they work to address pupils' needs within linguistically and culturally diverse settings. So again, hearing from the students and from a lot of teacher educators, more need is out there to really incorporate more EAL content into ITT programming. Okay. And then another reason for us to want to promote this is that it's more of a observed anecdotal reason, but we have seen within the last couple of years, 2 to 3 years at the Bell Foundation, an increased level of need within provision, really within schools. And a lot of this has come up as we have been more recently welcoming refugee children into the schools from Ukraine, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, and Syria. It's not that refugees are a new thing in the UK at all. It's just that there's been this influx recently that has drawn attention to some of the limited prior knowledge or experience in schools that can support new arrivals and refugee children. And also we're seeing limited systems and processes that are in schools for this, as well as a real increase in the demand for continued professional development at the Bell Foundation, at least too, for welcoming refugee arrivals. So that's another need out there. So let's take a minute, if we can, at this time and just see what these 3 reasons, the linguistic diversity becoming really normalized in schools, lack of EAL in ITT programming, and as well as the increased levels of needs in schools. Those 3 things, if you can just tell us, does this resonate with your contexts, what you're seeing out there? And if so, how? So if you can put this into the chat box, that would be great. Get a bit of idea of your context and what you are seeing out there. So please go ahead and put that into the chat box now. Okay, so all of you can see these coming up in the chat box, but 65% of my class are EAL learners at this time. Okay, some not in my school, but in my local authority, very diverse linguistically. Just breaking for prayer, and we'll come back as soon as possible. Okay, that's good. Okay, fantastic. I know that there's a lot of different contexts out there, different ITT programs doing different things for this. And you're coming from a whole lot of different contexts out there. So I think it is something, and I'm sure because you are here listening to this, I think a lot of you are very aware of the need for this to begin with. But still, at the same time, our contexts really differ around the country, and we're very aware of that as well in the foundation here. So it's exciting to see that many of you are addressing this and realize the need for this out there. So thank you for your comments there. Okay. So again, the final point that we wanted to make in regards to reasons for incorporating EAL into ITT programming is the is the ITT core content framework itself. As we know, the ITT core content framework specifies the minimum entitlement of all trainee teachers, and it allows providers to design curricula that is appropriate for their contexts. So that is something that you all have the ability to develop that content. It also includes really general statements, as we have seen, no reference to EAL or any specific groups really. And this encapsulate the idea that quality teaching is good teaching for all, really. So the only reference that it does have within its references is an article from 2010 about the expectations of teacher expectations and student achievement in teaching English as a foreign language, which is quite different than our context as an additional language within the UK school systems in an English environment. Okay, and finally, it's good for us to recognize too that the teacher standards really remain the criteria for assessment out there, and these do actually mention the need for adapting distinctive approaches to work with English language learners as well. Okay, so all of that can be the idea that EAL is not mentioned in the core content framework can be seen as an opportunity. It can be seen that, you know, it's not singled out, and it's during the process of normalizing diversity within our mainstream classes, which is a good thing. And only if that could be central then to our ITT programming so that we can prepare teachers to work in environments like that. So that is a good thing. It's also a risk though, because without mentioning the specific groups of EAL, it tends to flatten difference in some ways, and it promotes that politics of universalism, which really, without having understandings of the different needs or challenges or strengths of different groups out there, we really do risk not being able to provide those distinctive approaches that are really necessary for success of all of our learners. So in response to this, the Bell Foundation has, some years back now, created a guidance document that shows the types of EAL content along with, that kind of aligns with ITT core content framework and the teacher standards, showing an EAL lens onto the same comments of the learn that and the learn how to aspects of the ITT core content framework. So this document is available and free on our website and can support you as you think about designing curriculum in your own contexts. And it is something too that we have used to really develop some of the ITT modules that we have on offer for you as well. So with that, I will briefly touch about an overview of our modules before letting Emily launch the third one here. Some of you may know, and if you don't know, I would like to just find out if, again, another poll, it just popped up. I wasn't ready for this one, but let's take this really quickly too. This is information that we at the Bell Foundation are really interested in hearing about. So the first poll that will come up is asking you, just yes or no, if you currently provide specific EAL training in your program. Some of you, I saw that in the chat box, have done that or are doing that. And the second poll is if you have used any ITT modules already that have been offered by the Bell Foundation before. So that would be modules 1 and 2, because we're just launching the third one today. So let's see if you can quickly answer those. It would be helpful for us to see that as well. So they're all coming in. I'll give you the final results here in just a minute. Okay, I think this is okay. So this is looking good. About 62% of you actually do provide some training for EAL in your programs, which is great. 36% are not at this point yet, which is also good. And we also have about 30% that are using some of our modules, and about 70% have not yet. So that's good information for us. So thank you for offering that. if you haven't used our modules, I will go ahead now and briefly explain what these are. We do have 3 modules. The first one is all about understanding EAL, a good introduction, and talks about the contexts, policies, and pedagogy of EAL, and a lot about learners who use EAL, families, backgrounds, demographics, that type of thing. The second one actually has us look more at language for learning, where we are looking at curriculum and the language demands within that curriculum, and then thinking about how to scaffold and support language development based on the content that they are learning within curriculum, as learners are learning English through the curriculum, as many of us know. And then today, the third one is all about assessing learners who use EAL, which is highly important, so that we can kind of know where our learners are at and what type of support or challenges they will need from us, and also to know how to target some language goals. So that will come out in the third module. All of these modules are free, and they are available on our website for all England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. They are based on the ITT core content framework, although that's not really mentioned within the modules itself, but some of you might want to make some amendments, just small ones if you feel the need to. All of it is editable content, so you can do that if you think is needed. There are, for modules 1 and 2, there are 2 versions available. One is a short 60-minute session, and the other is a longer 3-hour session of material. We obviously recommend the 3-hour one only because it really does allow more opportunity for trainees to actually engage with the material and apply some of the learning during the session itself. So we do recommend that. But we do understand that you all have different needs, priorities, constraints yourselves. So we have tried to make these as flexible as possible because of that. The 1-hour session also has 2 versions for primary and secondary. Our material that we include in these is something that provides examples and uses real material from those different grade levels. So that is also something that we have out there. The 3-hour session is put in 2 different parts. The first part is applicable for both primary and secondary in terms of just core content. And then there's a break, but then the second part actually divides up into primary or secondary settings. And that's something that you can choose for your audience, which might be most applicable for the trainees that you are working with. And then for the module that we're going to be hearing about today, that is only a 1-hour session, and again, based on primary and secondary options. Okay. We also have different design features for face-to-face and for online learning. So the slides and the materials will cater to either of those. It's your choice in terms of what delivery model you're using. You will get session plans with the modules that will give you some basic general information about learning intentions, timings, just prep information, as well as background information on all of the slides, the presentation slides that you'll be receiving as well. If you want to read that beforehand or look at any of that or use any of that as you are presenting the materials. Okay, you will also receive materials for trainees. Some of them will be handouts that can be used during the tasks, during the sessions. Tools will be available for them to take and apply and use in their placement practices. And also there's additional readings and that type of thing, material as well. Okay. We also have different types of content in the presentation. So core content is something that we suggest for all trainees to be engaged with. Green slides will notify you that those are online options. We also have supplementary slides, and that is if you are wanting to go deeper into certain areas, we've allowed for some of those areas to be explored further. And editable content is where You might want to go in and change some data or demographic information. We give you links for how to do that. It's mainly in module 1, really. And then, of course, as I said, phase specific for secondary or primary. Again, all of this is flexible for your own needs. It's totally available for you to go in and change around. Okay. And also our slide types are different. The blue slides are going to be, this is so that you kind of know what you are doing as you go along the presentation. Blue slides are for information, orange are for activities and tasks, green is feedback on those activities and tasks, and then of course the red is signposted for the whatever section you are addressing at the time, okay, for organizing purposes. Okay, we also pedagogically have designed things for before, during, and after the sessions. Before sessions, there might be some pre-readings or some surveys that that the trainees will engage with, so that they will be, you know, return to that during the sessions, maybe have conversations or discussions around it. And after the session, we try to have additional activities that they can actually apply to their placement, or further learning, or returning to surveys to kind of look at what they have learned or changed opinions on from the learning itself. During the session, we have kind of basically designed this based on Maldarez and Waddell's framework, where we begin with experience, with the student teacher's experience, and relate all of it to experiences that they may already have. The get out stage is where we help them to think about and to articulate their own thinking about these different concepts and ideas that we are exploring. And at that point, after all of that, then it's the put in, where we will present new content, and they'll try to link that to their understandings. And then finally, we will end with experience. And this is where we do try to have the student teachers take this out into their practice itself. So that is our design pedagogy, and I am going to now turn it over to Emily, who is going to introduce us to Module 3 at this point.
Thanks, Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
Just share my screen. Okay, yep. So we are going to have a look now in a little bit more detail at the outline of Module 3. So Module 3 focuses on assessment, as Sheila mentioned earlier, and it's split into 4 broad sections. So first we look at the definition of EAL and why it's worth focusing on it. Then student teachers go on to look at understanding proficiency in English, followed by why it's important to assess proficiency in English. And then finally looking at practical ways to carry out assessments for pupils who use English as an additional language. So what I'm going to do in this part of the webinar today is take you through the session and show you a little bit of what's there. So as Sheila mentioned before, we have a before the session task for student teachers. So in this particular module, Module 3 on assessment, there is an optional pre-course task where student teachers are given a set of 9 different statements about learners who speak English as an additional language, and there's a particular focus on assessment within these questions. So student teachers would look at these questions, these statements, and then decide how far they agree with them. So we can see there's an example here, B. Statement B, it says it's important to assess English language proficiency. And student teachers would then decide how far they agree or disagree with those statements. So that's to help them start engaging with the content and examine their own assumptions before coming to the session, which will be revisited later on. So there's that to get student teachers started. In terms of the actual session itself, because we have these modules can be carried out in any order. So module 3 could be used as a standalone sessions, and because of that, it briefly offers an opportunity to recap this definition of what EAL is. it is the definition of EAL is actually covered in Module 1. For those of you who've used Module 1 already, you already know that. And for that reason, we have an option of either a recap slide for those who are already familiar with what EAL, the official definition is, and any potential issues around it. And then we have optional slides, which introduces the same concepts for trainee teachers who haven't already looked at this definition. So that's really just to provide a bit of context and foundational context for student teachers who may be new to EAL. And then obviously student teachers need to know what different levels of proficiency in English look like, and of course why it's important to assess proficiency in English. So that's what the next two sections of the course aim to do. So first, student teachers look at these broad descriptions of what a learner can typically do at different levels of proficiency in English, and match those broad definitions to appropriate bands on a proficiency scale, going from A new to English to E fluent. So we've got these broad descriptions. You can see an example of one here in that big blue box. And these come from the DFE's proficiency in English codes, which were actually originally taken from Wales. And a bit of slight bit of background for those of you who maybe aren't aware, but between 2016 and 2018, schools in England were required to report on proficiency in English using these codes for all their EAL learners. But sadly, this requirement to record proficiency in English was removed by the government, and which is sad, as we know that proficiency in English is a key indicator of achievement in English medium schools, and we know that knowing the proficiency in English of learners can help teachers to make informed decisions about instructional design. And so a lot of our policy and influencing work is around encouraging the DFE to reintroduce these codes. And also maybe worth mentioning that this requirement to report on proficiency in English is still mandatory in Wales, but just not in England. So bringing us back to the session again, that's a bit of background information for those of you who weren't aware, but the main aim of this part of the session is to raise awareness of student teachers of what learners using English as an additional language can do at different levels of proficiency in English, and sort of helps to set the context for the next part of the session. So in the next part of the session, in part 3, student teachers then look at why it's important to assess proficiency in English. And they start this section by looking at research by Strand and Hessel, which shows that proficiency in English is the biggest predictor in attainment when English is the language of instruction. So we have the slides here, and they illustrate the findings of Strand and Hessel. The second one on the right there showing how learners who are new to English or in the early acquisition stage tend to score significantly below the national average, whereas those at the developing competence stage are very close to the national average, and those who are competent or fluent score consistently well above the national average. So together, these slides highlight the importance of how important it is to understand a learner's proficiency in English and how that is central to attainment in UK schools. So sort of helping student teachers to understand really why proficiency in English is important. The next part of the session goes on to look at how teacher standards, so part 1, section 6, outlines the stipulation for teachers to make use of formative and accurate and productive use of formative and summative assessment, and to be able to use this assessment and data to provide appropriate language support to enable progress. So obviously as tutors you can then highlight that the fact that assessing proficiency in English is part of the assessment that needs to take place in order to ensure that learners are being supported and challenged appropriately. So it's looking at the teacher standards and then taking that EAL lens and putting it onto that standard there. And then the last couple of slides in this section look at the ITT core content framework and highlight relevant aspects from section 6 of the core content framework, pointing towards how assessing and understanding a learner's proficiency in English is central to providing adequate and appropriate support. So those are the first 3 parts of the session. And the main focus of the session is really on part 4, so how to carry out assessment for pupils who use English as an additional language. And this section is divided into 3 further subsections. So we look at how to carry out assessments for proficiency in English, how to carry out assessments of curriculum knowledge, and how to carry out first language assessments. So we'll have a look first at assessing proficiency in English. So this part of the session starts by looking at principles in understanding what effective EAL proficiency in English assessment looks like. And one of the things we talk about in the session, or that the session does, is talks about the importance of using a robust evidence-informed assessment tool. The session itself highlights the fact that it is important that a tool is in place. We draw on the Bell Foundation assessment framework for schools in order to contextualize a lot of the examples that we use throughout this, but are aware that many schools use different frameworks, and that as long as they're robust and evidence informed, whatever tool they have is great. We also look at the session also goes on to mention that it's important to assess all 4 domains, so listening, speaking, reading and viewing, and writing. And then that it is important to assess learners throughout from bands A all the way to band E to make sure that appropriate support and challenge can be put in place. So in terms of how to carry out proficiency in English, the next part of the session looks at a suggested approach of using an assessment tool to carry out formative assessment of a learner. And this is broken down into these 3 stages. So what needs to happen before the session, during the session, and after the session. So what the session suggests for before the lesson is that student teachers identify a lesson in which to carry out the assessment and to consider what language domains, like speaking or so on, that the learner will use in that lesson, so that the student teacher can identify an appropriate domain to assess. So for example, in the secondary session, there's an example of a geography lesson. And let's say that the geography teacher in their next lesson have planned for students to learn about river formation and to, in pairs, explain how a river changes as it moves from the source to the mouth. So in that context, the appropriate domain to assess would therefore be speaking, because these learners will already be engaged in a speaking task. Student teachers are then encouraged to look at relevant proficiency descriptors within the chosen domain to focus their assessment on, so that they can familiarize themselves with the assessment tool that they're using. And as I said before, we've got the Bell Foundation assessment framework for schools that we're using to provide our examples. Just a quick side note that the Bell Foundation EAL assessment tool that was developed by a team of academics and researchers from Cambridge and King's College London. So that's one of the reasons why we've chosen to use it here. So student teachers would then, once they've chosen their domains, they're going to do speaking, they would then look at the relevant proficiency descriptors related to that particular speaking task and select a few. And then the next slide suggests that teachers comes up with a couple of suggestions for teachers in terms of thinking about preparing to record their assessment when they go into the classroom. So are they either going to mark down the descriptors on the framework itself, or perhaps maybe they want to create a very quick table, copying and pasting the descriptors into that table so they can take that in and just tick them off. So they don't have to do a lot of looking around. It's very quick, hopefully, and easy to use during the observation of the learner, which would be the next part in the session here. And then we've got the final section, which is after the session. So student teachers are then encouraged to review the notes and descriptors, making a judgment of what the learner has evidenced in class, to record this centrally. And then the final part of this suggested procedure is obviously one of the most important parts. It's looking at that assessment information and using this to inform instruction. So this example that student teachers are given here continues to follow the example they looked at earlier of the geography lesson and looking at river formation. And there's a particular descriptor that has been taken as a target, and then a few examples of the types of support that could be put in place to help the learner with that kind of target. So we have quite a fairly practical suggested approach for how to carry out formative assessment using a particular framework, but any kind of framework can be used to carry out this same procedure. So still on proficiency, looking at proficiency in English, the final bit in this section touches on the importance of using curriculum-based materials to carry out assessments of proficiency in English, and also highlights some key considerations regarding initial proficiency in English assessments as well. So that's our section on how to assess proficiency in English. The next section goes on to look at curriculum, how to assess curriculum knowledge. So this section starts by asking student teachers to draw on their own experience and knowledge to discuss reasons why assessments that have been designed for first language English speakers might be difficult for learners who are new to English or in the early stages of English language acquisition. So thinking, for example, about SATs or GCSEs, what would be difficult for learners who are new to English if they were doing SATs or GCSEs. So this gives student teachers the opportunity to consider the effectiveness of these types of assessments, and also any barriers that these types of assessments might pose for learners who are in the initial stages of English language acquisition. There's a suggested feedback slide which highlights elements which can create elements of first language English tests that can be a barrier. For example, cultural references, complex grammar and vocabulary, and so on. And then we come back and refine the focus a little bit more. So student teachers are then asked to consider how they might be able to test knowledge of curriculum content. Again, allowing them the opportunity to use their own experience to construct ideas linked to what they already know. So thinking about any placements they might already be doing, have done, any observations that they might have done, their own schooling, schooling of their children perhaps. So drawing on their own knowledge to think about different ways that they could test knowledge of curriculum content for learners who are new to English. And then the session follows up with a number of feedback slides, so you can gain lots of ideas from student teachers, and there are some suggested feedback slides which tutors can draw on to provide feedback to build on what the student teachers have contributed. So a few of them here, for example, so this suggests avoiding tasks which require lengthy written responses, using simple and clear instructions, giving the learners choice to evidence understanding, asking learners to match things, so pictures to words or phrases, for example, and promoting the use of the learner's first language, so allowing them to use translation apps or bilingual dictionaries. So just there's a few more slides as well on the actual session. And then students take these ideas, the ideas they've come up with themselves, the ideas from the feedback from the tutor, and they're then asked to apply that to a specific area of something content related that may arise in their specific context. So we can see, for example, in primary, they're asked to discuss how to adapt these two tasks so that they're suitable for testing curriculum knowledge of learners who are new to English. So for example, they're asked to adapt this task, what are the stages in the life cycle of a frog? And into the secondary one, they look at this task, describe the similarities and differences between animal and plant cells. So rather than being very potentially requiring very extensive written or verbal responses, they're asked to think about how to adapt these to still be able to get the same, to assess whether or not learners understand the curriculum content without that demand of English language knowledge to convey that curriculum content knowledge. So we've got a couple of suggested feedback slides for this, which tutors can obviously build on. And then finally, the session finishes by looking at key considerations regarding the assessment of the first and other languages that our child speaks. So in this section, it's a lot shorter than the other two sections. Student teachers are once again asked to draw on their own experience to consider benefits of assessing a pupil's first or preferred language. And the feedback highlights that language skills are transferable, that first language assessments can highlight where there may be learning needs and strengths, for example, and that this can inform support, including support related to any potential SENDs. And then the final slide in this section provides input on how to arrange a first language assessment. So encouraging student teachers to talk with parents or caregivers, to find out information from prior schools of learners, and to, where possible, enlist the services of an interpreter. And then, as Sheila mentioned before, we've got additional optional follow-up tasks for student teachers. There are 3 follow-up tasks for this module. So the first one is where student teachers come back and revisit the pre-course tasks. So at the beginning, they were asked to decide how far they agree with these statements, and then they come back and they revise those statements. So do they still agree or disagree to the same degree as before? So that obviously gives them the opportunity to revisit the content, concepts from the session. Another task that we have for this post-session is a handout which has questions on it that aim to support student teachers for planning assessments of both curriculum knowledge and proficiency in English in their own contexts. So, for example, if we look at assessing curriculum knowledge, we've got some questions there. So what strategies can you use to test knowledge of learners who are new to English in the early acquisition stages? What might you need to prepare in advance? And this is thinking about a specific lesson. So questions to prompt them into thinking, okay, how can I test this curriculum knowledge and to incorporate that therefore into their planning. And there's one final post-session task, and this is a guided observation checklist, which is the aim of this is to support trainee teachers when observing qualified and experienced teachers, and this has a focus on assessment of learners who use EAL. So we can see here, for example, on the right-hand side, this is the checklist. So there are a list of strategies on the left-hand column. So we can see, for example, it says the teacher asks the learner to match words to pictures. The teacher asks the learner to point to something to show evidence of understanding, and so on. So the trainees can tick that and make comments about whether something was used or not used, or what they saw, or maybe something that could have been used but wasn't. And the other page, which is on the left there, gives guidance for the trainees on what to do before the session, during the session, and in follow-up after the session. So this is around things around having conversations with the teacher that they're observing around the context of the class, what they're teaching, who the learners are, those sorts of things as well. So to review module 3, this is what we have for module 3. So we start with a definition or a recap, what proficiency in English is, why it's important to assess proficiency in English, And then this last section on how to carry out assessments for pupils who use English as an additional language, starting by looking at assessing proficiency in English with that suggested before, during and after approach. Then we're looking at how to assess curriculum knowledge for learners who are new to English, and then some final bits and guidance on assessing first language. So that's a 1 hour session, and it should the reason why we decided to keep it just 1 hour instead of 3 hours is because we figured that it's important, and we understand that there's not a great deal of time, so we wanted to make sure that all the key concepts and information was contained in just these 60 minutes. So that brings us to our final bit on suggestions for use in terms of this module. So coming back to this Foley report that Sheila mentioned earlier, this report from Edinburgh into initial teacher education and English as an additional language. So it highlighted a need for further EAL training in ITE programs, as Sheila mentioned, but it also provides some guidance on how to do it, and it recommends a dual approach to ITT and EAL. So the report recommends that ITT programs offer a number of different sessions to give a grounding knowledge and strategies. But it also suggests that the bulk of input and requirements for reflection and action should be infused throughout individual subjects across all core concerns for an ITE program. So when you're talking about scaffolding, how do you support learners who use EAL? When you're talking about feedback or assessment or group work, how does EAL factor into each of those individual core concerns? So it's a sort of a sprinkling of EAL across the program. So yeah, as the report says, the focus is on making all lessons accessible rather than treating EAL as a bolt-on addition. And so we have in our modules 1, 2, and 3 these provided this first bit, so giving the sessions which give a grounding knowledge and strategies, and obviously each ITE program needs to determine how to incorporate the bulk of EAL training throughout the program, so how to sprinkle that EAL program, so EAL throughout the program so that it doesn't become a bolt-on addition. And so our final question for you today is one of these. So choose one of these questions, and I'd like you to let us know your thoughts in the chat box. So either, how does your ITT program currently incorporate EAL assessment, that's of proficiency in English and of curriculum content? How does it currently incorporate EAL assessment? That's not, I didn't finish typing that question apparently, but how does it currently incorporate EAL assessment into the program? Or how could, if you are not already doing that, how could you incorporate aspects of EAL assessment in your course or program? Or if you'd like to tell us more broadly about your approach to EAL in your setting, then feel free to do that as well. So just let us know in the chat box.
I think too, quite a few of you with them, some of these are coming in now, but quite a few of you are doing programming for EAL content. So it'd be just great to hear how you go about doing that as well. If it's not just necessarily with assessment, as Emily said, but just how does it work in your setting? Because I think that's would be really helpful for others of us out here to really learn from each other how this is taking place. So it'd be nice to hear from some of you with that as well, since many of you are doing it, I know.
So we've got a couple of answers. So Ruth's, it's tricky to find time. We go into a lot of depth, but we cover assessment and the need to assess which is a really good beginning point, isn't it? Because once you've got that assessment in place, you can then use that to inform support, and it starts a bigger conversation. We share the Bell Foundation assessment framework and how to use it. Helen's saying, after having an input on assessment, students have a specific task to complete on their teaching practice to assess an EAL learner. They then bring this back for discussion in seminars. Great. So it's taking it and then putting it into practice and then discussing afterwards. There is a module in year 2 of our BA course that focuses on assessment and reporting, and EAL assessment is included. That's really good to see that. We briefly touched on assessment, talk about translating exam papers, for instance. That's really interesting. Use Flash Academy assessment. Use the strategies mentioned in part of the guidelines for ITT so they can be incorporated into all lessons.
I think too, Ruth raises that she thinks the assessment of curriculum knowledge is really interesting to explore, because that too, not just assessing for English proficiency, but I think that's, it's a real, and trying to feed that into all of her teaching strategies and working within all the different methods courses or content courses, that type of thing as well. Because not just assessing for comprehension or access to the curriculum, but also modifying and adapting for learners to be able to share the knowledge, content knowledge that they know, and how to do that is really, really important. So I'm glad that was another good one coming up here as well.
Yeah, thanks.
And could be incorporated then as well throughout your programming as well. Yeah.
Just reading through these.
Trainings, get to teach. Okay. Some of you are, having main issue is ensuring that all trainees get a chance to teach or work with learners who use EAL. So that is also a challenge for ITT programming out there. And as we know, we're not training student teachers for just a particular school, but for a school anywhere, really. So that is important to try to somehow maybe visit other schools or that type of thing as well, for that particular piece, and videos and all. I think, again, I don't know if we have a slide, Emily, on this too, but I mean, the Bell Foundation, along with other places too, do provide a lot of resources out there in terms of teaching materials and strategies and that type of thing, and additional courses and guidance and webinars and all of that too. So if you aren't familiar with some of that from the Bell Foundation here specifically too, that there's a lot to explore in support of some of this, but the ITT modules are a good place to start because they do really relate specifically to trainees as well.
I love this, what Neve has just said. So that they have an EAL tile on Moodle for each subject. So I think that sounds like a really interesting way to make sure that EAL is considered throughout the program. I can see also PG completes a task in year 2, complete an ITP week where they assess and apply strategies. And then Neve goes on to say that it's difficult to find experts in school or any videos of expert teachers teaching and assessing. I think that is something that we are trying to looking into a bit more this year in terms of getting more content from classrooms. So I think maybe watch this space, but I'll have a think about other videos. I mean, I think YouTube is probably very good, but whether or not it's particularly I don't have any suggestions of any particular channels to, but if anyone else does, we would love to hear. Rose saying main issue. Oh yeah, you just said about that. Yeah. We also
we've talked a lot at the foundation, I know too, about trying to access some or to create some videos out there of really good models of expert teaching
Yeah.
with this as well. So that is, something to look for and wait for, because we are trying to do that, and we'll obviously make that known when that
Yeah.
does occur as well. So.
Yeah, and just to flag that final thing that Joe has just said, we visit a school where high quality EAL provision is embedded so they can see theory and practice, and when they have to go, then they have to go back and apply it. So that's great. Great that if you have that locally, and if you don't, I don't know if it's worth reaching out to any local networks to try and set that up. Obviously, that's something that I'm sure people on their agenda already, but also interesting, Marie, to hear that you've been looking for videos but couldn't find anything appropriate, so that videos will be very useful. So that's very good feedback for us. I'm just going to move on to the final slide of the presentation before we wrap up. So we had a few ideas of other ways that you could incorporate EL assessment into your program. So some of these have been mentioned already, but including assessment modifications within lesson planning assignments. So when you set lesson planning assignments, how can you ask your, can you ask your trainees to do to assess their thinking specifically about assessing curriculum content? What can they do to assess curriculum content in the lessons that they're teaching? Student teachers could also assess a piece of student writing for proficiency in English, so they could carry out some of these assessments themselves, maybe come back to you or do it with other peers as well. Again, this is what you've just suggested, I think, Joe, in the chat box. So observe experienced EAL practitioners, either live or possibly recorded, if we can find some. Student teachers could interview an EAL coordinator. I don't know if that would be possible, but could ask questions if you think beyond assessment, but if you wanted to have a focus on assessment, you could ask assessment related questions, or you could ask broader questions. And you as tutors can assess student teachers how they modify their assessments for learners using EAL as well. So incorporating assessment of assessment into that framework. I can see there's something in the chat box. Thank you, Ruth has posted a video. We'll have a look at that later. Okay, and just the final note to say, if you want to access the modules, please email this email address, info@bell-foundation.org.uk. Include the name of the accredited ITT or IT provider that you represent, and we will give you access to the modules. If you would like your trainee teachers to be taught using the Bell Foundation ITT modules, but you don't want to or unable to deliver them yourself, you can email us at the same email address detailing your needs, and we will be able to get back to you about whether or not we have some availability to come and run those sessions for you, either us or we have Bell Foundation licensed practitioners, which may also be able to support there as well. So do email and let us know. And I think that's just about wrapped it up. So really hope that was useful in giving you an idea of what the final module in the session in the suite of ITT modules look like. Anna's asking, yes, you probably do need to email again, Anna. I think maybe just email that email address and ask. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview. That's the final module that makes up the complete suite of ITT modules on EAL. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Sheila. And
thank you very much. It seems like there's still things coming in
yeah.
In terms of other resources on the chat box, but I think we're kind of saying goodbye now and wrapping up, and it's been great to spend this past hour with you all, and good luck as you continue this really important work.
Thank you for watching the Bell Foundation's webinar recording. If you want to explore these ideas further, you can watch this recommended clip. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can be the first to watch the Bell Foundation's latest content.